Okay, I want to continue. So, this is the next episode of my book, Not a Victim or Survivor, Life Beyond Domestic Violence and Rape. It's the first book in my series, Life Beyond Silence. It's available on Amazon in ebook form and also in paperback. I'm sure you can find it at other spots too. As I said from the last episode, this episode that I'm going to be doing now in the podcast is like a nightmare. I have no other words to use except for that. But a nightmare is something you wake up from, and this is something I couldn't wake up from. So I'm going to continue. By the way, I'm the author of the book, and I decided to do it in podcast form so that my listeners could hear directly from me, and I could also give a little bit more insight than I did in the book. I also feel like it may help me finalize my other two books so that I can go ahead and get them up on Amazon by doing the podcast. And I also feel like that it helps me be in touch with those that are either reading or listening. And you're welcome to ask me questions or make comments. Um, I, if I get any, I will do everything in my power to answer the questions. So let's get started with the next episode. I remember bits and pieces because it hurt me so deeply. My mind seemed to say, just don't acknowledge it. Deny that this is happening to you. It can't be happening to you. You've been through too much already in your life. You can't be that unlucky. Life has to give you a break. What else does life want from you? Inside, I remember I was hearing voices. I felt numb, suicidal, and on the brink of having a nervous breakdown. Was this my destiny? If God is listening, hear me. Help me. I know you have to be on the edge of your seats wondering what is happening. What is so bad after all? I have been through so much. What on God's earth was happening to me now? Well, here goes. One day in the fall of '92, I was cleaning house. I remember it was a beautiful fall day, and I had just opened my husband's new fishing tackle, which was a gift from me. I was feeling on top of the world that day. I had been cleaning, and although I don't remember where the girls were, the phone rang. It was a man who said they had my husband in custody at the police station and that he would be able to go home with me soon and would be calling for me to come and get him. I asked what was it for. I was thinking there might have been a wreck or something like that. The man said it was over carrying a concealed weapon. I was stunned. Phil didn't have a gun, at least not that I knew of, and he wasn't violent. This man was crazy. This must be something really stupid, a mistake or something. I remember when I hung up, I thought about everything. Maybe he had a fillet knife in his car from fishing when he had gotten pulled over for speeding. Or maybe the police had found it. They had to be mistaken. Phil wasn't a hoodlum. What in the world was this all about? I was completely confused. Okay, now think. The cops aren't flawless. I mean, one time while coming home from work, I had been stopped because they thought surely I was up to no good or drunk, since it was around 2 a.m. in the morning. And it wasn't only one patrol car either. I remember I was just driving down the street, minding my own business, and out of the blue there were two patrol cars with lights around me. Four patrolmen jumped out with their batons drawn, seized me, and strongly questioned me as to my whereabouts and who might be able to vouch for me, like I was some kind of criminal. I knew they had to be crazy, since I was dressed in my work uniform and I had my computer equipment in my hands. But I have to admit, they scared the living tar out of me. Needless to say, I reported the incident to the captain on duty that very night, but I doubt anything was ever done to the officers. So this too had to be some kind of horrible mistake. I was sure Phil would explain it all later to me, and that would end that. Unfortunately, however, it wasn't the end, but just the beginning of a nightmare. I waited patiently as I could until it was time for me to go get him, and then I drove down to the detention center. I don't remember what I said in the car, but I remember we went to where his car was parked to pick it up, and then I followed him home. Never in a million years would I have thought at that moment that my life, as bad as it was, had already been, or as bad as it had already been, would be totally indescribable in the next few hours. I know it's going to be hard for you to fathom what actually took place that evening in my house, because even after all this time, it's hard for me to remember all that happened in those few first hours. After all, it was like my heart was being ripped into shreds, and it's extremely difficult to recall who said what. Time stood still, and I was like a zombie when it was all said and done. I do, however, remember Phil told me to sit down. I remember thinking, what? Tell me. Tell me, please. He started telling me not to hate him, and he never meant to hurt me. That it would be okay, and that he loved me with all his heart. What? Tell me. I started to cry. I don't remember what was actually said. I don't remember the actual sequence. It was as if he was talking and it took a lifetime for it to reach my ears. Like an old movie where the sound is out of whack. I remember hearing myself breathe. I couldn't focus on any of his words. He had said that upon leaving work, he had gone to a bookstore and he was browsing and he looked at all the Playboys, etc., and finally bought a Hustler, something he knew I definitely did not approve of. He had then gone out to the car, and since we hadn't been doing it, quote unquote, having sex, or at least not much lately, he was feeling that so-called need to have sex, so he started masturbating. In the meantime, a pretty woman went by, and since it was a woman, he never stopped masturbating. Thereby, evidently, she had seen him and went somewhere and called the police. To make a long story short, he said after he finished, he didn't leave, but he went into another store. I remember thinking, just how stupid can you be? And upon returning to the car, he was arrested by the police for indecent exposure. I remember I was shaking uncontrollably. The anger building inside of me made me numb and despondent to any emotion. I remember I just sat there. One time he asked me if I'd heard what he said, And did I have any questions? Was there anything he could do? I remember him saying how he supposedly loved me and how he never meant for this to happen. My God, as bad as I thought it could be, was it wasn't even comparable to what he had actually said. Was I dreaming? Surely not. My husband? God help me. I was shaking so hard. He thought maybe I was having a nervous breakdown, and he offered to call someone for me. Call someone? Was he kidding? I remember I felt limp, lifeless. I couldn't cry. My mouth was open. Then I heard something. Where it came from was beyond me. But suddenly I heard the words, "Get the hell out, and God help you, because I never want to see you again." The words came out of my mouth and shocked me more than it did him. I was stunned, not at what I had said, but that I was still alive. I had began to think I was a little comatose. I remember he started to cry and got down on his knees. "Please, honey, don't say it's over. I do love you. I'm sorry. Please, just wait. Give me some time to try and work through this. Then I'll try to make it up to you. Please don't leave me. Please wait." I remember thinking, wait for what? What were you thinking? I couldn't think of any questions to ask. Maybe I just didn't want to know the details. I remember I told him to stay the hell away from me, and I went in to take a hot bath. I remember I laid in the bathtub and just cried, not bothering to wash. When I came out, he asked if I wanted to talk, and I said I was going to bed and to leave me alone. Basically, I think leave me the fuck alone. Let me think. I know I had to be in shock. I was numb and totally disgusted. Actually, physically sick. I remember being noxious. The next day, while he was at work, I thought about the kids and our life together. Our new son, and what choices there were, or what my choices were. After he came home, I told him it would take time, but I had to think it over, whether I could deal with this or not. I told him even though this had to be one of the hardest things I'd ever dealt with, by far, I knew him better than anyone else. Obviously, I didn't know everything, but for the most part, more than he gave me credit for. For instance, I knew he fantasized a lot about voyeurism and being seen in a public place. After all, he had tried to get me to have sex with him before in elevators, a rest area, etc. I knew he probably thought it was a sexual high, a cheap thrill, and in his heart, I knew he never meant for any of this to happen. I knew he was stupid and he hadn't bothered to think about the consequences of what would happen to our lives. No, correction. What was going to happen to my life? Phil was still a problem, was still, in my opinion, no, correction. What was going to happen in my life? Phil was still, in my opinion, a good man, and a good husband, and a father. I should know him better than anyone. After all, I've had my share of men. To me, he wasn't so different than other men. He had just followed through with one of his fantasies, thereby making it a reality, when he should have let it remain only a fantasy and an unfulfilled one at that. But that was neither here nor there now. It was too late to make changes. What lie ahead of us was what I was worried about, or what I was most worried about. I told him for now I wanted desperately to try and get through this, but I didn't know what was going to happen, and I might end up changing my mind. I really couldn't give him a definite answer other than that for now. I just wanted to wait and see. Just give me some time. I remember he asked if I was sure, and my reply was, I'm not sure of anything. From one day to the next, basically hour to hour, my moods were in a constant turmoil. Sometimes I'd be fine, seemingly to forget what we were going through, as though it never had even existed. And then in the next moment, I would be crying uncontrollably. Basically, I was on the brink of total hysterics. Sometimes I wasn't even able to look at him without feeling nauseous. Not to mention, I couldn't bear for him to touch me. Things were going to be hard enough for us for a long time. It would take a lot of work on both of our parts to keep us together. I still loved him, and I felt like I still wanted our marriage. To put it simply, I still wanted a life with him. At least I wanted to try. Ever since we had met, he had tried to get me to be voyeuristic, and now I was wishing I had been. Maybe if I had been, none of this would have happened. Maybe if I hadn't been so uptight. Maybe if I'd tried to see the fantasy for what it was, well then we wouldn't be going through this nightmare. Although I'm not a stupid woman, I felt somehow responsible. Not a lot, but a little. After all, I'd been cold, and we had been fighting a lot, and I had been pushing him away. I felt that by him getting caught in the parking lot, he had felt some sort of thrill, and I knew that he truly had no idea the repercussions this whole mess was going to bring. People that didn't know the circumstances would be quick to judge, and unfortunately would read too much into it. Yes, I agree. It sounds bad. Taboo, some would say. But everyone, including my friends, had made mention to the fact that they had done voyeuristic things or dreamed about doing public places such as elevators, rooftops, beaches, deserted roads, or while driving in a car they had gotten the so-called urge and just pulled off at a rest stop. Don't get me wrong. I agree it was the wrong place, the wrong time, but he did it. And I had thought long and hard about why. In my mind, I think it was like I was just replaying it. Just about any man I know of, if deprived long enough, will do whatever it takes to get off. A dirty magazine, a porno movie, etc. I had dealt with a lot of that before. No matter what anyone else thinks, I believe it was just an urge that he now deeply regretted. Furthermore, Phil was a good man, a good father, and even had been a good husband. And even though after everything he was now putting me through, I still loved him. Anyway, we resigned ourselves to wait it out and see if we could hold our marriage together. Just to get past court, go to counseling, whatever it took, and then maybe we could put all of this behind us. We just had to take one day at a time. I had to take one day at a time. I knew I loved him, and I knew I didn't want to throw our marriage away. I was just hoping that we could put it behind us. After all, the holidays were coming up. Soon it'd be Thanksgiving, then Christmas, then New Year's. Maybe then things would be different for us. Then again, maybe not. I remember sitting in the living room. It was sometime before Christmas. The date I don't remember exactly. A knock came at the front door. After all we'd been through, I was on edge constantly, not knowing what was going to come next. It was the sheriff's deputy. He had some sort of paper in his hand that I had to sign for. and I remember clutching it as I started to read. It was a summons to appear in the court against my own husband from the state of Kentucky. What? Oh my gosh. Oh, please, Jesus. What was happening to my life? Who was I sleeping with? I thought I knew my husband. Was it all just a lie? Was he living some sort of second existence? God help me. Please, God. I remember I started to quiver inside. God, why me? Why? I remember I started making phone calls, but to no avail. I just had to wait for Phil to come home, which seemed like it took forever. I don't remember what all was said, but I remember thinking if I didn't have the kids, I could just vanish, simply refuse to deal with this anymore, kill myself, or maybe some psychotherapy. In less than 3 months, I'd had more dropped on me than I would have ever dreamed of. Was I a strong person, or was I in the twilight zone? Was I living a nightmare? My husband began telling me how supposedly it all started before the other thing, and he knew that it was coming, but how he'd hoped that since it was all blown out of context, that somehow it could be resolved without me ever knowing. What was he talking about? After all, he had hurt me enough, and this was now going to push me over the edge. Another woman, phone calls, obscene phone calls. Jesus, help me. What was he doing to me? All he ever had to do was just leave, divorce me. Then he could have whoever he wanted. Why on earth hurt me so bad? Why? To make things worse, this woman, come to find out, was an older, used up, white trash looking, good for nothing female. And her husband had played cards with us. We soon stopped associating with them because they were into drugs and were, in our estimation, what you would call bad parents. Why her, for God's sake? So you see, of all the people he could have ever been with or ever wanted, why on earth this trash? Why not just go up to a bar, pick up some young, good-looking woman, and have one of those macho one-time flings? Maybe then everyone, including me, would have understood. But her? Are you freaking kidding me? Anyway, come to find out, he'd been calling her for excitement, and she'd welcomed all the attention. After all, her husband didn't treat her well, which probably had something to do with Phil choosing her in the first place. At least that's what I was thinking. Phil said the phone calls led to him finally going over to see her, which at first they were only talking, supposedly normal flirting stuff. Then he had made some kind of advancement. She acted like it was okay and then suddenly asked him to quit, which he did, and then he said he left. At least according to him, that was what happened. Wham bang. Then in no time he finds out she's pressed charges against him for sexual misconduct. My first thought was, did you try to rape her or what? Phil said, no, I didn't. Then what? I was finding myself calmer this time around. After all, I had almost collapsed last time. Why did she do this? He said his attorney and him could only conclude that perhaps it was due to pressure from her husband. Money. Who knows? Whatever I thought about it, and most women, including me, have been through unwanted male advances. Husbands, friends, co-workers, male acquaintances that may have made bewildering advances out of nowhere, and you just push them off. tell them no and be done with it. Furthermore, if she had been really attacked or something, wouldn't this paper have said, wouldn't she have filed something different instead of a misdemeanor? Wouldn't it have been more criminal? So where does this all fit in? Where is this missing piece to the puzzle? Things just don't fit. Phil's attorney told me not to go over there because she might bring me up on harassment charges for just going to her door. He said it wasn't going to amount to anything and I should just put it behind me. Phil assured me he would try to make it up to me, but something inside of me was a gnawing pain, like it wasn't over yet. There was going to be more. Although I prayed, I was wrong. So, I guess I need to clarify this in some way. So, what I said was mind-blowing. There I was, in a marriage, thinking, yeah, we had our problems, but I was giving him fishing tackle. Next thing I know, I hear from the police. I go get him. He tells me about masturbating in his car while looking at a magazine, while getting a thrill from someone seeing him. And then he actually gets out of the car, stays there, gets out of the car and goes in another store. Actually, it was the Kmart. And then comes back out and gets arrested for indecent exposure. Now, like I said, I was trying to make some kind of excuse for him, knowing how men are and how stupid he evidently was, because I'm not a man, but if I did something illegal, which I wouldn't, but if I did, I wouldn't stay because I would know the police would be on their way. Was he totally clueless? I mean, he had to be to not know it's illegal to expose yourself in front of anybody. And of course she was going to report that there was a sexual crazy person in the parking lot masturbating. Of course the police would show up. Is he just freaking stupid? That's all I could think it was. He was stupid beyond stupid to do it in the first place. But to stay and not leave? I mean, yeah, she might have wrote down his license plate, but it was just bizarre in the first place. And I was hurt to the core. But then I was trying to make excuses for him. And I was also like fixing to like fall apart. And through the whole thing, I was just shaking deep down in my soul. And then the next thing I know, there's a knock at the door. And they hand me papers. And I'm reading the papers, and he comes home from work, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? And he's like, oh, well, this, and well, that. And then, yes, she's a skanky woman, and yes, I know she's on drugs, and yes, I know she's not the greatest person, but I made sexual advances towards her, and I thought she wanted it, and then she said no, so I left, and it was all really innocent, and it's a misdemeanor, and I don't know why she did it. Maybe her husband, I don't know. And he's telling me all this, and I'm like, what? What am I supposed to do with this? And at the same time, I remember when I wrote it, I remember him calling me and doing those disgusting phone calls that used to happen all the time, where people would get a phone call that they didn't know who was calling, and there'd be heavy breathing and stuff. He used to do that to me all the time. So I'm like, okay, so in my head I was playing it out. Maybe he started doing that. Next thing you know, she laughed, he laughed. She found out who was doing it. She invited him over. I just had an excuse for every part of it, trying to somehow make sense of it in my head. You know, was I living with a sexual predator, or was I living with a disgusting, I don't know. I just didn't know what to think. Except I knew in my heart this was my life so messed up. Just so tormented, messed up, disgusting. Was my life such a freaking mess that this is my fourth husband? My first one was an alcoholic. My first one was an alcoholic who became despondent, didn't talk to me, that I left. I left him. And he literally drugged me through hell with my daughter. My first daughter. Then I married the crazy person who I loved, who I knew loved me, but I was not only physically abused, but emotionally abused, who was a drug addict and an alcoholic, who I was walking on eggshells every day, who tried to kill me by shooting at me. Like, what in the world? And then Kyle. Yes, Kyle looked on the surface to be a military, normal, decent human being. But after marrying him, I found out he had visited the red light district. I found out he had nudie books locked up in our cellar. I found out he watched pornos. Our sex life had turned to where he was like masturbating on my butt and my legs while I was sleeping, or he even masturbated on my face one time while I was sleeping, and I woke up and was livid and sickened over the fact that he thought that was okay. And then I meet Phil, the charming, stick kind of personality who thought he was the God's gift to women, who I looked past the red flags and now have had a child with. A child that I love, that I don't regret having. To this guy who went to Desert Storm to do his duty and now is back in our town where, I mean, the kids at my daughter's school had him come to the school so they could all give him hearts and cards and things that they had made for him for his return. I mean, more so my daughter's class, but what I'm saying is everybody had known he had gone away for Desert Storm and was back. And it was a small enough community that lots of people knew lots of people. And yes, I had found out he had watched a porno that he hid from me. And yes, I knew that he had I guess, fantasies of voyeurism. He was always trying to get me to have sex in a public place. You know, elevators, you know, bathrooms at restaurants, things like that. Anything and everything, just so that there'd be like this thrill of doing it somewhere that you're not supposed to do it. But I guess I must have a little bit better sense than him. I'm not stupid, and things like that are against the law. They are. Yeah, you can do them, but if you get caught, your whole world is upended. And I was never going to do something like that. But you know, everybody from where I come from, and every teenager I've ever known growing up, has made out on an old dirt road or something like that. But no, I didn't play those kinds of games, those thrills. Not because I was stuck up, but because I just was too scared to. You just could get caught, right? That's the thing. You could get caught. And then here he is out with people, well, with the woman that me and him both had shunned. Like, they were our neighbors, and they came over to play cards, and we thought they were pretty decent people until we heard them start yelling at their kids, and then we found out they did drugs, and we didn't. Yeah, we might have a beer or some kind of alcoholic drink, but we didn't do drugs. And when we found out they did, we were like, well, they're never coming to our house anymore. We don't have any money, and we're not like rich people or uppity people, but we don't want that here. We don't want it in our home around our kids. And so, nope, we won't have anything to do with them anymore. And then the next thing I know, I get a paper saying she's pressing charges against him for sexual misconduct. What in the world? Why would you have any conduct around her? It just didn't make sense. And I was sickened and disgusted and scared to death. I mean, my family already had plenty of things against me. You know, I was this messed up person who made mistakes at every turn in her life. I got with this guy. I got with that guy. This guy beat me. This guy takes me to Germany. Everybody just thought I could do no right. I was the girl that could do only wrong. And now, my fourth husband, the fourth husband I've had, and 4 children later, not only jacks off in the Kmart parking lot, but makes sexual advances against a woman that is just, I just have no words for her. And I was right. Like, in my head, I was like, why didn't you just go to a bar one night? Slip out while I'm sleeping. Go to a bar. Meet a pretty girl. A drunk pretty girl. You're drunk. You all hook up. You don't tell me about it. Why tell me about it? Like, go find somebody, anybody, have sex with them, and don't tell me. I mean, I definitely didn't want to know, but don't tell me, and then just leave. Say you're done with me. Get a divorce from me. Everybody else does. Join that crowd. Just become another ex-husband. But why put me through this? And now what? You're down on your knees begging me to forgive you? Who are you? I was so disgusted. But I was just, I think, looking back, I remember it. Every bit of it. And I remember feeling like I wanted to jump off a bridge, cut my wrist, bleed out in the bathtub, all the little suicidal things that you see people do. I wanted to do all of them. But I honestly was like frozen. Yeah, I wasn't being beat this time or emotionally abused. But was I? In a way, was I being emotionally abused? I don't know. I don't have an answer. I just felt like a zombie. I felt like I'm trying to make sense of it and put all the pieces together in my head, and I can't. I feel like I'm a zombie because I get up every morning, I send the kids to school, I do the housework, I go do the auditing work, I take care of my baby. He goes to work, he comes home. Whose life is this? And in a way, I feel like, surely, yeah, this is your life, Kim. You have literally lived a million lives. And you're only 32. And you've lived through catastrophe after catastrophe. Which, putting the pieces together, you're like the reason. It's all your bad mistakes. One mistake after another, one guy after another got you here. Like literally, you are the reason. God must hate you. Life must hate you. You didn't just get a bad hand, you got a bad deck, because every single card in your deck that's dealt to you sucks. And I was pretty much a basket case. Lots of people said a lot of things to me during all that. And you're going to hear more about it in the next episode. But lots of people said, what in the hell? Your husband's a pervert. Your husband's a disgusting person. And I agreed with them. But I just was trying to make sense of it. And even when you know deep down all the wrong that's in that mindset, like you're trying to make sense of it and you still see all the wrong. I was just like, what the hell? I love him. But I have no words. Like, I have literally no words. So, I guess I'll leave this here for right now. There's a lot more to the story that I'm going to say, but this is where I feel there's a point where I want it to sink in. I want you to remember what happened to me. In less than like 3 months, my world had just started collapsing, imploding. It just had literally started falling apart. I was literally losing my mind. So at that very moment, at this stopping point, those two major things had happened to me in like 3 months' time. And I was like a zombie. I was like, my mind was ticking. I was thinking this and I was thinking that. And I was trying to piece it together and I was trying to make sense of it, even though I knew it. There was no way I could make sense of it. Why would he do this? Did he not realize it was ripping me apart? And how was I going to hold us together? Why was I trying to hold us together? I just was like numb. Like I was falling through glass, being cut, and just could not make sense or grab on to anything to keep me from falling. That's the only thing I can like somehow describe it to you. And I know it's way over the top and I'm sorry for that. But I literally can't think of anything else other than it would be too simple to say the rug was pulled out from underneath me. If the rug's pulled out from underneath you and you fall from standing to on your butt, that's not a big enough description of what I felt back then. It's just not. And like I said, I know it sounds crazy for me to describe it that way. But at the time, yes, that's how I felt. I was literally looking for a lifeline. And I really can't tell you how come I just wasn't screaming all the time. Because I wasn't. Oh yeah, I cried. And I remember thinking of suicide and things like that. But I wasn't just standing in a room screaming. I had kids to take care of. I had work. I had my mind ticking away. I had to do dishes. I had to do laundry. I had to cook dinner. And not one single time did I not do that. But I was a zombie, walking around, doing what I could. And then I would just cry when I was by myself. And he would ask me to come to bed and I would say nope. And it's funny, even to this day, I still sleep on the couch And it's been years since I've slept really all night in a bed. But I literally started sleeping on the couch when my life crumbled around me. And I still sleep on the couch. So I'm going to end it here. And I'll come back in the next episode. Please continue listening. I'm sorry I get dramatic. I'm sorry that it is my life. If it helps just one person to hear my story, then it's worth it. If by sharing my story it helps one person to hold on, to try to keep their sanity, to try to know that they're not alone in this world and there are people just like me, I'm sure, out there somewhere. I don't know them, they don't know me, but I would guarantee you there are other people out there that are literally walking on eggshells, living through disgusting things, and feeling like zombies, that need to know that they're not alone. That no matter how messed up their life is, they're not alone. And if me sharing my story helps just one person, then it's worth it to me. Because there was nobody there for me. There was nobody that I could really share everything in my life that would have ever said anything other than, of course, Kim, you're a freaking fuck up. Your whole life has been one bad decision after another. You deserve everything you get. That's what people, especially, well, I won't say exactly who, but there were plenty of people back then that would have given me that answer. You just deserve this because literally you've made every bad decision in the world. It's not surprising that you're not going to live in the pit of hell for the rest of your life. There's more. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening.